Over the last few days, we have seen mounting evidence that Elon Musk has his lackeys under the auspices of DOGE rummaging into the most highly sensitive parts of the US Treasury Department. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started.
You know, Paige, this has been a growing scandal within the federal government. What we see happening from agency to agency, where Elon Musk's DOGE has people who we don't know. Some of them appear to be quite young. We don't know if they have security clearances. We don't know what their status is. Any event, we see them in agency after agency accessing some of the most highly confidential and sensitive information that the US government has. This includes in the US Treasury Department, where a database of literally everyone and anyone who gets payments from the federal government is contained within it. There's a lot of concern about this. Well, now, for the first time, we see litigation that is brought to stop this from happening. So the team at Democracy Docket has been all over this story. Paige, bring us up to date.
On Monday night, Public Citizen and State Democracy Defenders Fund filed a lawsuit against the Treasury Department for sharing confidential data and personal information with the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which is Elon Musk's group that he is using to root out what he doesn't like in the federal government. Now, Marc, to fully understand the scope of this, the Treasury Department executes payments for basically all of the federal government. Last fiscal year, it dispersed over $5 trillion, or 88% of all federal payments done last year. This is a huge system. It's how people get their Social Security benefits, Medicaid. It is how federal employees are paid. Federal contractors get their money. All of this information contains names, Social Security numbers, dates of birth, home addresses, contact information, bank information of millions and millions of people.
Yeah, Paige, and it's hard to know exactly what is even going on here, right? I mean, we've heard reports that they have accessed this on a read-only basis. That was a suggestion made by some, I think, close to the White House. But then we saw other reports that said, no, they can access both read and write. In other words, they can change records. So it's very, very unclear right now exactly what they are able to do and what they are doing with this information. But when you match it up against the other things we know that the Trump administration has been doing, the other things that we know that Elon Musk has been up to, it paints a very troubling picture. And let me just point your attention to another sort of branch of this whole thing, which was the effort by the Office of Management and Budget, supported by the White House, to try to freeze all federal spending under grants and loan programs. Now, that has now been blocked by not one, but by two federal courts. We've talked about that on prior videos. Democracy Docket has been covering that on its website and in its newsletters. If you're not already subscribed to those, make sure you do that now. The link is above and in the show notes below. But Paige, one of the hypotheses, and it is nothing more than a hypothesis right now, is that because they have found themselves frustrated in that arena, that by taking control of this database and being able to read the records and write over the records, that this may be just another way they're going to get at trying to prevent the disbursement of funds. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem at two levels. One is it's a practical problem, right? If you are waiting your Social Security check, or you're a government contractor awaiting payment, or you're a nonprofit organization awaiting a grant, the idea that the federal government may simply turn off the computer system or delete your records or alter your records in a way that prevents that from happening is incredibly problematic. And like I said, that is something that the courts can get involved in, but it's not ideal, it's not fast, and the like. But the second thing, Paige, that I think it is a problem is that people are concerned about just their basic privacy. Like irrespective of whether it's going to affect the money flow or not, I think people are afraid that, what if this is weaponized in a way against political opponents? What if their personal information is somehow disclosed, either because they are an enemy of the administration or the Trump administration believes them to be an enemy, or just through, or just through error, just through people who are not familiar with the system using it and creating security vulnerability. So there's a lot going on here. And I am thrilled and glad to see that there is litigation that's being brought on behalf of these labor unions and labor organizations to fight this fight. It is a critically important fight. I suspect it's not the last of the cases we'll see on this topic. But Paige, you have to ask yourself, where the hell is the Republicans in Congress? I mean, the Republicans control the branch of government that should be most protective of its spending power, should be most concerned about the exposure of its constituents' information to these people at DOGE who, were not elected by anyone. They weren't appointed, into positions that weren't subject to any vetting by, the normal process. And I think, you got to ask yourself, yes, the court's good. The fact that lawyers are bringing these cases, great. But you got to ask yourself, why is Speaker Johnson, why is John Thune not standing up to this?
Right, Marc, you would also think that the party that prides itself on fiscal responsibility and wanting to be responsible with money would say, hey, maybe we don't have one guy who's not elected just magically take control over the entire country's payment system. And we also know this entire situation is improper because the career civil service employee that was the acting Treasury Secretary until Donald Trump's pick was confirmed denied Musk and his affiliates access to the system. Now, this civil service employee had been at the Treasury Department for over 35 years. He was one of the few people who had control of the system. Colleagues who have been interviewed and media outlets have described him as dedicated to his job. They never knew what his politics were. He was just focused on getting the job done. He left last week. He resigned after clashing with Musk's affiliate over trying to get access to this system.
Yeah, and I think, again, we have to put this in a broader context, Paige, because it's not just at the Treasury Department, right? We saw that at the USAID, the head of security, according to reports, physically clashed with some of the DOGE people who wanted to access secure facilities, places in which highly confidential or even classified information is kept. And what was the result of that? Not that the security official won that fight, figuratively, but rather that he was suspended. He was put on leave, right? And these people were given access, presumably. And, so when you hear that at the Department of Treasury, there is, again, a career civil servant who only, interest is in protecting the American people's data, presumably, he is somehow on the losing end of a power struggle with these DOGE folks, it's very, very concerning. And to make it even more concerning, Paige, I mentioned that there has been some conflicting information. Well, if you read what Donald Trump is saying, it's not clear that Donald Trump's even aware of what some of this is that's going on. When you read about some of what has been attributed to the Treasury Secretary, that somehow this was just read only, it's not clear that even the president, the White House, or the Treasury Secretary himself is aware of what's going on here. So it is entirely possible that, that you have folks who are doing what they think they can get away with, not what they have been authorized to by or intended to by the elected officials, certainly not what Republicans in Congress are stepping up and saying, look, I mean, at any time, the Republican appropriations chair could say, yep, I want unelected, unvetted people to be rummaging through the records of individual recipients of Social Security. I want them looking at the database of who gets paid and not. And I want them potentially targeting, for non-payment, people who we have passed laws to send money to. But the Republicans are not taking ownership of this. The White House is not saying, oh, yes, these people are acting directly under our control. The president doesn't seem to be saying that. And certainly Republicans in Congress aren't. So you're kind of left with, well, what is the word, Paige, we use when an unelected oligarch has his minions, in these clashes, accessing this information, potentially overseeing programs to have people resign, with pay, and, programs of shutting down agencies and this, what do we call that? Well, in another country, if this wasn't the United States, we'd certainly be describing it in much less flattering words than the legacy media is today. Legacy media today acts like this is somehow just like business as usual. In some ways, they're kind of like just sideline spectators, you know, reporting on, this power faction or that power faction, whether the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State is winning some internecine battle. That isn't what this is. This is much more serious than that. And everyone needs to be aware of that.
Marc, I think you also have to look at it with the context of FBI agents and DOJ prosecutors being fired for their involvement in January 6th investigations, into investigations around Donald Trump's misdoings. And then you have to connect that back to Donald Trump's own reissued Schedule F executive orders, stripping career civil servants of protection so that they could be fired and replaced more easily. And you and I have talked about this before, that the vast majority of the work the federal government carries out is not done by the top politically affiliated appointed officials. It's carried out every day by the career civil servants who are there for years, if not decades, doing their jobs throughout political changes and different administrations.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make an excellent point about the FBI and the Department of Justice, because, again, in normal times, some FBI agent or someone in the Department of Justice might call over and say, hey, what's going on? They might even open an investigation. Some inspector general might open an investigation, right? Because this doesn't look normal. Now, it doesn't mean they'd open an investigation, they'd find criminality, but they'd at least inquire. But Donald Trump fired the inspector generals, fired at least 17 of them. And we know that, as you point out, the FBI is under incredible pressure. The Department of Justice, federal prosecutors are under incredible pressure right now. So which FBI agent, which remaining inspector general, which career prosecutor is going to poke their head up now and say, you know what, I have some serious questions about this? Right? They have been cowed, presumably, and by the way, understandably, by the political pressure that has just crammed on top of them. And so, you worry that what's going on at the Department of Treasury or elsewhere in the federal government is against a backstop of the cop on the beat essentially being chased off the block while suspicious activity is going on. And that is really, really worrisome. Well, Paige, let me say this. Democracy Docket is going to stay on top of this story. It stays on top. It's going to stay on top of all of the democracy news, and it's going to stay on top, particularly, of all of the litigation that you see going on. There have now been more than 20 cases filed against Donald Trump or his cronies since he's taken office, and Democracy Docket is following them and giving you good, accurate, fearless, independent information about them on a daily and weekly basis, if not more frequent. Please make sure you subscribe to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, and stay tuned to this YouTube channel where we will be keeping you up to date as well. Thanks for joining us.